I'm John Landrum. I'm one co-founder of the movement that we started on civil discourse, what we're calling the Neutral Ground. It's the neutralground.org, and that's the site you're in that you're seeing this video. So welcome. This afternoon, I'm interviewing Dr. Joel Wade. Dr. Wade is a psychotherapist and author, primarily focused on human happiness. He's written a book, Mastering Happiness, and another book, The Virtue of Happiness. Joel and I have worked together more than occasionally. Joel has done some session material that we've used at my employer, and I've interviewed Joel more than once on my private podcast, Triple Win Workplace. So we know each other fairly well. And Joel, I want to start by saying thank you for being here. I'm really excited about your involvement here.
My pleasure. And I'm excited about my involvement here too.
Joel, I remember when I first told you about this idea of reaching out and doing what we can to encourage people to set better examples in how we talk to each other about issues. One of the things you said was, "This speaks to me deeply."
Yes.
What did you mean? Why did you say that?
I think there's so much intensity of animosity for our fellow human beings because they happen to have a different political opinion than we do. And what that comes down to is, and I don't want to minimize, we all go to a lot of trouble to understand things and form our opinions and our values and so I'm not trying to say that none of that matters or to minimize the meaning of it for anybody, but there's a way that it turns into feuds that are just as vicious as anything we experience in life. And I see so much pain in people. And my work as a psychotherapist and a life coach is all about understanding each other. It's all about within each of us is a world. And when we're at our best, we're trying to understand each other's worlds. And that's when the magic happens. That's when we're able to really make beautiful things happen in the world. When we assume that we know the other person's world and just when we stick a label on it and throw it into the garbage can, that brings out the worst in us, and it always has. And so I see that happening. I mean, people aren't, for the most part, actually feuding with guns and stuff because of this, but it gets close. People really, they write each other off, they cancel each other, and it really bothers me.
And Joel, let me throw out a straw man that I don't actually believe, but somebody might say, well, who cares? Some people like feuding, right? So you have a view though, that this toxicity in our civil discourse is actually a major drag on the ability of people to be happy.
Yes, it is. And I also see it as in some way we're being manipulated into it by media, by politicians, by people that have a vested interest in us taking a side on one thing or another. We all have a deeply held negativity bias that goes back throughout humanity. If we didn't have a bias toward the negative, if our ancestors hadn't had a bias toward the negative, they wouldn't be our ancestors because they would have gone up to pet the little saber-toothed tiger kitty. Those are the ones that are not our ancestors. So it's about 4 to 1. We tend to the negative input that we get from the world is about 4 times as powerful as the positive. And if you think of what you see on the news, if you think of what we hear from politicians and from a lot of the people that we listen to about opinions, it is extremely negative. and it's extremely polarizing. You're with us or you're against us. If you're not on the right team, you're evil, you're horrible, you're a terrible person. And
Joel, I'm thinking it must be kind of, if you think about it that way, it must be a pretty scary world if I actually believe that half of the people that are in my environment are either evil or stupid or badly intentioned.
yeah,
That can't be good for my sense of well-being.
no, it raises your cortisol levels. It makes it harder to sleep. It increases anxiety and depression. It also increases a sense of helplessness because we don't have control over that. So there's so much focus on these opinions and these policies as though it's life or death, when very rarely is it life or death. It's a difference of opinion, and it distracts us from the essential elements that we can probably all agree on to some degree. And that's what this project is about, I believe, right? I mean, that's what we're looking for. How can we have a conversation where we're actually listening to one another and learning from one another and finding common ground and finding what's going to help us as human beings going forward?
And Joel, you and I have talked about this. One of the tests of a healthy organization is the freedom of people to disagree.
Yes.
Right? If you say, in this organization, there's just lots of subjects where nobody can disagree with this person because they're the boss or because they're scary or because of emotions or whatever.
Yeah.
You know that organization is likely to be less successful over the long haul than an organization where disagreement within the boundaries of trying to solve problems and mutual respect and friendliness, where disagreement is a norm, it's a much healthier organization. Absolutely.
And that means accepting conflict and feeling safe enough to enter into conflict, and having enough trust in your organization, in the people that you're dealing with, to be able to enter into conflict and know you're not going to have your head torn off.
And Joel, not to wear this other topic out, but let's go back one more time to, you told me about, when I say, how does this environment affect human happiness? You actually had real life experience of a person or two really being torn up by this environment.
Oh yeah, it's actually not uncommon for me to prescribe. I've had clients that have been so anxious that they couldn't function. They'd be lying down on the floor trying to get some sense of peace and mind so they could refocus. And the intervention was, turn off the news. Just turn off the news for a week. Turn off podcasts and news and talk radio and any other source that's feeding you the polarizing, information. And almost always within a week, the anxiety is, if not completely gone, significantly reduced. Because the truth is, when we look, let's just take the TV news, which is the most, it's the most effective at bringing a negative reaction to us, because there's visuals, there's sound, there's music that makes it important. You see the eye rolls of the people and the scolding and the shaming. And it's all, part of it's visual, part of it's sound, and then there's the information itself. And if you look at that, try an experiment. Turn off the sound and go on, spend 10 minutes watching, say, MSNBC and 10 minutes watching Fox. Pick any show. And you'll see the same kinds of expressions, and you'll see they're doing the same thing. It's just with different data. And they're telling you what you're supposed to think and how you're supposed to feel about it. And so it really undermines a sense of how how did you come to that? That's different than where I've come. How did you get to that? I'd like to understand that, because that's
So we're less likely to think objectively, think critically, ask further questions to say, do I accept that? What could be wrong with that information? And there's a certain rhetorical strength in it that undermines your willingness to think independently. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And then we end up stereotyping the people that disagree with us, that have a different opinion from us.
Right.
And we all stereotype when we first meet somebody. You go, oh, they look friendly, or they look, like a comfortable. There's all kinds of broad brush strokes when we first meet somebody. And then hopefully we have some curiosity, we get to know each other a little bit. But the trouble comes in when we stick with the stereotype, and we don't let that stereotype move. And that's exactly what we're encouraged to do by media and politicians, particularly, to serve their ends. They have their own motivations. For the media, you'll tune in more if you're more upset, and that's their business, and that's fine. But we need to learn how to deal with that effectively.
Joel, if you were coaching a loved one on how to navigate and be happy in this environment without putting our head in the sand, right? I could completely turn off all, outside sources of information, but I don't think that's quite what you're saying. But to be an informed citizen without being disturbed by all this, and to be and just to be happy in this environment, what are the vital few swing thoughts you'd be suggesting?
I think first of all, and probably the most pivotal thing, is distinguish what you can control from what you can't control. For example, when watching the news, most of it is national or world events, which none of us as an individual has more than a tiny bit of impact on, unless we happen to be the president or prime minister of some country. And we really don't change much. We vote, we maybe have conversations with people, but in terms of affecting what's happening, what we see, we really don't have control over that. And yet we're encouraged to spend most of our time and energy thinking about that and arguing about that and getting in people's faces about that. And whereas really what we have most control of is our own personal relationships, our work relationships, how we do our work, what kind of quality of work we do, who we are in the community, how we affect the community. That's where we have the most impact.
And Joel, that's interesting as you say that. I think most people listening to this would agree, when you're working with real humans on real tasks, you tend to think, hey, that's a pretty decent person I'm working with.
Yeah.
The place where everyone else seems bad is when we're not, working with real people in real time in our community. And it's a lot of people we may not even know.
Yeah. In fact, there's been research done where you have a group of people, diverse people, and if you're working together on a task, it takes 4 minutes before those differences are irrelevant.
Yeah.
4 minutes.
Wow.
The other thing is, I think, because I'm not advocating being, apathetic about things.
Right.
But take your data in by print, and not as opinion pieces, but as look for the raw data. That's one piece. The other thing is, try and step back from the specific policies that are hot right now and talked about, and reflect and try and orient to what are my deepest values as a human being, with how I am with the real people in my life. What are the values that I live by? What are ways of being that I consider virtuous and that I express with integrity in the world? Start there and then think, okay, how can I advocate these things that are meaningful to me in the world? And maybe it'll be in the immediate community. Maybe there'll be some impact I have nationally or at the state level that I find because I'm clear about the fundamental place that I'm coming from, and not starting with, we got to get this bill through, or we got to stop this thing now. That's reacting and putting out fires. And that gets us stereotyping each other in a fight, rather than, okay, what do I want to see through in my life? So.
Great. You just answered my final question. That's fantastic. So to be effective, think about your own deep values and how do I communicate or model those deep values in a friendly, respectful way.
Yes.
Right? Versus being too wound up in this particular outcome in the moment, which tends to take us to a different place.
Yes. And I'll say there are times when it might not be totally friendly. I mean,
yes.
I'm not advocating, that everything is just loving and sweet all the time. If there's conflict, sometimes there's some anger behind it. Not rage where you're trying to destroy the person, but I'm really upset about this. This means something to me. So it's not about trying to gloss over any emotions that you have, but being in charge of them, being in charge of the direction that you're taking, and taking responsibility for how it affects people and how it affects you and how it affects the actual expression of your values in the world.
Thank you. Joel, I bet this is not the last of our interviews that'll be uploaded to this website. I'm going to thank you again for your time. And this is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, John. My pleasure. Happy to anytime.